So some of these have been hard-won learnings through painful experiences.
Yes, yes. That's always fascinating when when it's the customer who suddenly is like, "Wait a minute, something doesn't work anymore. Any longer. It was working yesterday and now it's not today." Those are the
Yeah.
kinds of things that keep me awake at night.
Welcome to Bits, Bytes, and Beyond, the podcast that takes you beyond the buzzwords and deep into the real-world challenges of moving your data. I'm Trent Blakely, Head of Product Marketing at PCCW Global Console Connect. In each episode, we'll unpack a specific technical subject, break down what's really going on, and explore how to solve it. Whether you're a CIO, a network engineer, or simply the person who always gets asked, "Is it the network?" Then you're in the right place. This isn't thought leadership, it's technical leadership. Now let's get into it. Okay, welcome to this episode of Console Connect's podcast. Today we're going to be talking about some, I'm not sure what we're going to call this. I think it's going to be cloud pitfalls, stuff to watch out for, and stuff that, you would normally have to work with a cloud consultant to find out about or have deep experience. So that as part of our intro today, I think it's worth noting that roughly 80 to 90% of enterprises today are using multiple clouds. Sometimes that's multiple public, sometimes multiple private, but it's very typical for a cloud engineer to have deep expertise in maybe one or two clouds. And so when you're working with multiple, it can be difficult to really know all those, gotchas, all those things to watch out for. So that's what we want to talk about in this episode. But we're going to focus our discussion to the top three clouds since they're the most common: AWS, Microsoft Azure, and Google Cloud. And maybe we'll do a future episode about some of the smaller cloud providers. So today, my guest is Jay Turner. Jay, do you want to introduce yourself briefly?
Yeah, certainly. Thanks so much, Trent. So I'm Jay Turner. I'm Senior Vice President of Product Planning and Development, which is a lot of words that actually just means that I'm kind of the interface between our the product side of our house, the folks actually kind of dreaming up what we want to offer, and the technology side of the house, so the actual implementation bits. So, just ensuring things like that our operations team has been properly trained, that they feel enabled to be able to support a new product, that we've got the proper training material for our public and internal training built around that, those sorts of things, information security compliance. So that's my job. But prior to that, prior to this gig, that is, I spent about 17 years at Red Hat. So I started my career effectively, selling software that was literally and figuratively free. So that was a fascinating career. Spending 17 years selling something that's effectively free was a fascinating way to kind of build my skills, and that naturally kind of segued then into working for Console Connect, which was a startup at the time, and we produced a couple of open source pieces of software there, and then PCCW Global happened to acquire us, and now we're able to utilize and leverage that same technology across a vast network.
Very nice. No, yeah, you've been at the intersection of a lot of, cloud things since their infancy, really, and hardware and network and software, kind of that intersection for quite some time now. That's great. Okay, and the other thing I wanted to note is you and your team. I mean, you see quite the variety of cloud implementations. Is that right?
We really do, and you mentioned kind of in the intro there that we're focusing on the big three, Amazon, Google, and Azure, obviously today, but we have effectively 20 different clouds, maybe even more, connected to our network, and both from a product perspective as well as from a technology perspective, the actual orchestration of that does fall into my team. So, that initial engagement with a cloud partner and figuring out how we actually orchestrate connectivity on behalf of our customers. That's something that we're the tip of the spear on, to understand that and to then maintain it. And that's why many of these kind of pitfalls just kind of happen in the course of us exploring this and doing the validation and testing and then working with our first set of customers to implement.
So some of these have been hard-won learnings through painful experiences.
Yes, yes, that's always fascinating when when it's the customer who suddenly is like, wait a minute, something doesn't work anymore, any longer. It was working yesterday and now it's not today. Those are the
Yeah.
kinds of things that keep me awake at night.
Good times, good times. Well, to start our foray into this area, I think one of the ones that I think really caught my eye was just AWS. And by the way, let me actually back up just a second. We're not sharing these to beat up on our friends, the cloud players, right? We
Oh,
partner
no,
with
of
these
course not.
people,
No.
right? These are just to highlight so you know what to watch out for. We'll try not to frame them in such a negative light, but they can be challenging if we're not aware of them, right? So one of them obviously is this the prefix advertisement limitation that AWS has. Do you want to dive into that for us?
Yeah, certainly. And it's funny that we just mentioned, hey, we're not here to beat up on our cloud service providers, and we're really not. And this is the epitome of that. Um, you know, you go back 5, 8 years, and most customers, enterprises were kind of just beginning their cloud journeys, and so they were effectively kind of attached to a single cloud provider, that is. And Amazon just for whatever reason, they chose to implement AWS under the probably the assumption at the time that most of their customers were going to be sharing, probably fairly large prefixes, 24s, 23s, 22s, and that was what their infrastructure was sitting behind, and that worked perfectly fine. Fast forward a few years, and now customers and enterprises are starting to kind of branch out into other cloud service providers, and they're landing on other cloud service providers who have recommended maybe a different addressing scheme. Azure is a really good example. They espouse this belief and best practice that each of your departments should probably have their own set of prefixes, and that allows for that segregation, and that works beautifully in the Azure environment. Then you connect the two and stuff gets weird. We've had a number of customers now, and it's typically AWS and Azure, oddly enough. And as soon as that 101st prefix is advertised into AWS over a direct connect, AWS goes, I'm out, and it drops the BGP session completely.
Oh my goodness,
Um,
the
so
entire
that,
session.
yeah, it drops the entire
Oh my.
session. It doesn't give you a warning. It doesn't say, "Hey, I'm just going to keep the 100 I know about. I'm going to keep a rolling 100." No, it closes up shop. It takes its ball. It goes home.
So that
Um,
100 prefixes is a hard limit.
it's a hard limit and cannot be modified.
Oh wow.
So what we've been able to then implement for customers is prefix aggregation.
Hmm.
So in these cases, we're able to at least say to the customer, "Hey, this may be a potential hazard waiting for you. Let's make sure we've looked at uh, what prefixes you've got, how you've got those arranged, and if we need to aggregate some of those into some larger prefixes so that we can get below that limit, make sure you stay below that 100 limit going into AWS, then it's all fine and dandy." And that's worked really well. And what typically ends up happening is kind of a knock-on effect. We find out that there's various prefixes that the customer actually doesn't need to go into AWS.
Hmm.
There's just no reason for those, whatever. They're completely internal to AWS. Maybe they don't, or to Azure, and they don't need to propagate. And so not only are we helping kind of bring down that limit and make sure that the enterprise stays operational, but we also then see a reduction in superfluous traffic. So stuff that they never intended to necessarily send
Hmm.
across the back and forth. So, a double plus there, shall we say?
Yeah,
But
that's very cool. You get some natural optimization.
yeah, and it's worked really well, and being able to then offer that custom aggregation when the customer does need it, that's a value add that we feel strongly about, and making sure that we're doing what's right by the customer.
Fantastic. Okay. No, that's a cool one. So our next point has to do with Google Cloud. This one is about limited VPC peering across projects.
Yeah, I tell you, anytime I see across projects, pretty much with any cloud, I kind of the hair on the back of my neck starts prickling. But Google and it's funny because Google has always, and not just Google Cloud, but kind of Google as a whole has always been a bit of a Swiss Army knife. And yes, you can use the blade as a flathead screwdriver. You can chop your finger off when you do that too, but it does work. So Google's one of those that's kind of like, we'll let you do whatever you want, but we're going to be very strategic about how that gets managed. And that is the
Hmm.
case here, where if you are trying to peer between VPCs across different projects within your Google Cloud infrastructure, you need to make sure that whoever's doing that, whatever user is actually get their hands on the keyboard, so to speak, has the proper IAM roles in both
Hmm.
projects,
Hmm.
or else you'll get errors, but they're not entirely intuitive about exactly what's going on.
Hmm.
And part of that is because on each side of that, each project, Google's trying very hard to maintain data sovereignty and
Uh,
data privacy on both sides. And so they don't want to say, hey, look, Joe Schmo doesn't have the right permissions to be doing this. Instead, they kind of produce an error that's talking about unauthenticated and doesn't have rights to do this. And it's you kind of have to read the tea leaves. And it's one of those cases where as soon as you see it once, any other time you see it, suddenly you're like, oh yeah, go check
uh,
the IAM permissions. That's going to be a permission
okay.
on one of the two sides of the project. So
The
it's a
first time
fun
you
one.
see
It's
it, it's a little cryptic,
oh yeah, yeah.
but then no, I can see where they're coming from, especially in very, very large implementations, multiple divisions, businesses with many, many departments. You want that separation of church and state, so to speak.
And inevitably, where this really rears its ugly head is I'll say acquisitions, but
Hmm.
acquihires, whatever, where suddenly there is a brand new project that had been autonomous previously, and now it's being brought into a consolidated org. That's really where we start seeing these sorts of issues pop up,
Okay.
because you've got two different sets of permissions more than likely.
Yep. No, good point. Okay. All right. Next one, back to AWS. This one's about elastic load balancers, ELB limitations on maximum connections.
Yeah, and this is a fun one. And at least in the first two scenarios we've talked about, there's kind of a direct correlation between something happening and something breaking.
Hmm.
This one's much more kind of a if you build it, they will come and then it will fall over type thing. So yeah, you've got your elastic load balancer, you've set it up, and life is going grand, and you're receiving connections and you're processing, and then suddenly you get more and more popular. The traffic volume on that ELB starts increasing, and suddenly you hit one of these active connections per instance limitations. And
Hmm.
and I probably should have gone back and made sure that I had all the limits in my head, but I think it's about 10,000 active connections per instance.
Okay.
And so, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 3 months, whatever down the road, suddenly your ELB is erroring out and no longer processing, and it's not completely intuitive that maybe that's what you need to go look at, because suddenly you're just not processing as much, and the natural conclusion is that you need more bandwidth,
Hmm.
and that's actually not it at all. You
I
just
see.
need more doers. You need more
Uh,
capacity to process that traffic. So it's one of those cases where you kind of have to take a beat and make sure that you're looking at the environment to understand exactly what's going on before you just immediately start hitting that
Yeah,
send more money to
increase the
Amazon
bandwidth.
button.
No, and I imagine most enterprises may not have like a dashboard where they see, the number of connections and the number of requests per second they're using on each ELB, right?
Right. Yeah, that's probably not top of mind
It's not a
for
KPI.
no, no, and yeah, it's probably below the
The
fold.
fold. Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
So I have
Um,
here in the notes that like an application load balancer can only handle a maximum of 10,000 active connections per instance. So yeah, what you're recommending is if you need more than 10,000, you're going to need another instance.
exactly.
Gotcha.
Which also
Okay.
helps with redundancy and
Mm,
failover and all of that as well. But yeah, it's just one of those things where suddenly, one of the days, suddenly traffic's not processing as well. Well, that's
yeah.
you've hit it. Congrats, you're successful.
Popularity can be a curse in some ways.
It can indeed.
Excellent. Well, okay, so this next one is also AWS related, but it's about limited networking features in VPC peering specifically.
Yeah, and this one I think is probably going to be less and less of an issue as we move forward, which is going to be good. So, historically, AWS had two different virtual interface types. They had a public and a private, and that's where we see a lot of this type of issue. That's the origin of that is we've got an enterprise who provision public or private. Typically, it's the private because they're trying to link together a bunch of VPCs, and then suddenly they start trying to route between a bunch of VPCs, and they're able to essentially route in a tripod. A can route to B, B can route to C, but A can't get to C, and
Hmm.
and they get very confused as to why that is the case,
Yeah.
and on paper it looks like it should be working. The flow should be working, but that's just not how AWS implemented their VPC infrastructure.
Hmm.
And I'm sure one day I'll probably hear reasons for that. But a number of years ago, AWS then introduced the transit VIF, the virtual
Hmm.
interface, which among other things, one of its primary goals was to deliver this intra-cloud connectivity.
Hmm.
And so, or intra VPC, sorry. So to be able to route between VPCs and to do that very easily. And then they continue to expand that so that now you can actually use a single AWS Direct Connect if you want a single one, and can now interconnect with many of your VPCs. So
Hmm.
AWS has seen kind of how the market has moved, and they've done a very good job of trying to follow that with technology and implementation, and to help kind of mitigate this sort of thing. But still, if you've got a couple of VPCs and they're interconnected with VPC peering, and you start having some routing issues, this is one of those things you can go look at, take a gander, make sure that the packets really are flowing exactly how you think they are.
Hmm.
And the good news is if they're not, you can provision a transit gateway and a transit diff, and life is grand again.
Excellent. No, that's
Packets will
great.
flow.
No, yeah, this seems a bit similar to kind of the classic networking of like point to multi-point, and then multi-point to multi-point or full mesh.
Yeah, indeed, and it really it is, and the law of you know, um, unintended consequences as you begin building your VPCs, and oh no, that department needs their own VPC. It's finance. We need to keep that segmented out. Let's put some IM around that, and then oh, but now they need to talk over here to payroll, and
Hmm.
wait a minute, okay, now we've got problems.
Yeah.
And it's a problem that has always existed. It's just you used to be able to walk into a computer room and into the machine room and repatch something or
Right.
put it on a new VLAN, and now things have gotten a little more complicated.
hmm hmm No, yeah, tougher to troubleshoot sometimes, tougher to
Oh
fix
yeah.
in certain cases. Yeah. Okay. Well, excellent. Now we're jumping over to Azure for these last two. This next one is about public IP address restrictions. So this is again about the number of public IP addresses you can assign to each subscription.
Yeah, this is you know I get where Azure's coming from here, that with public IPs, that's also then putting them in a position of having to provide that public connectivity as well to facilitate that. And so, you know, Microsoft says, "Hey, here's what a normal user needs. Here's the quantity, and if you want more than that, then please come back and scan your credit card." And that's
It's
kind of the
tricky
way
to
it
figure
works.
out. Oh
Yeah,
yeah, no, it's tricky to figure out what's normal. So I
yeah,
mean, they
exactly.
had they had to kind of draw a line in the sand somewhere, right?
And they did. And yeah, for one company it's a plenty, for another company, it's woefully underscaled. But you know, the good news is they do make it very easy to then add on, or um, what I've seen a couple of customers, and I've only hit this a couple of times across our user base to this point, but what I've seen one customer do was they took this as an opportunity to kind of evaluate their public IP usage, and did they really need public IPs on all those assets, or
Hmm.
could they migrate some of those to internal IPs, both from a cost savings perspective as well as from a security perspective, get that stuff
Hmm.
off the public internet. So
Yeah.
uh, we,
No, and
some
this kind of
mitigation
raises a side
methods.
issue that I think we've talked about in other podcasts. Is just how egress fees can really add up, right?
That is so very true. And that, it's similar to the load balancer question. That's one of those things where, it's death by a thousand cuts. Each month your bill just starts kind of going up, going up, going up. And it's not completely intuitive as to why. And one of my favorite stories on this front was a customer that provisioned an AWS Direct Connect and saw their monthly egress fees just go through the roof, despite the fact that Direct Connect does charge less for egress. So
hmm
in their heads, we've done something to save money, and yet our bill went up. Well, it turns out that they did not realize that it was a public Direct Connect, so a public
Oh.
VIF, and that Netflix actually was running AWS. So at lunch every day, their employees were streaming. I don't know what it was at the time, but whatever was the hit then. Their employees were all sitting there streaming their Netflix during
Oh
lunch,
my.
and that was all going over the Direct Connect, and they were paying egress fees for it. So
Great
yeah, you have to
story.
be really careful and keep your eye on that
Yeah.
egress fee, and work with a company that can kind of help you provision a Direct Connect potentially, or multiple Direct Connects.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Make sure that traffic's staying in region, depending on the cloud service provider. Region to region traffic could be tariffed or it could be free. It kind of depends on the subscription that you've applied to. So
Right.
it's
Right.
definitely a sharp edge.
Yeah, and egress fees are, I mean, that's true of every cloud has egress fees and each cloud has a different approach to those inter-region uh transfers, right?
That, yeah, very
Okay.
true. And thankfully, I think some cooler heads have now come in and said, "Hey, we understand egress fees are a matter of life, but customers need to be able to be able to transport their loads. They should not have vendor lock-in just because of
Mm.
these egress fees." So we
hmm
are starting now to see clouds offer free migration from cloud to cloud. Um, so at least that opens up the opportunity for the customer to make the right decision
Right.
from their perspective. So I'm
Yeah.
pleased.
No, a little bit more friendly when you're not locked in, right? So where you can, what I've heard is if you're completely leaving a cloud, you can apply and say you can say, all right, we're leaving completely, and so we need all the egress from this next month to be waived
Credit.
because
Yeah,
yeah, we're
I think it
exit.
actually ends up being a credit
Oh, really?
in arrears. Yeah,
Ah,
I don't believe any cloud service provider is now offering you kind of carte blanche. Here's a free month.
okay.
I think they're all letting you do the transfer, and then they say, "Oh, okay, well, here's your credit for that."
Which is less useful after you've left, right?
Um, Probably
I mean, maybe that credit can be applied to other services that
more
that
than
you
likely.
are going to get charged for. Okay. Well, anyway, let's go ahead and land this plane. I think this is number 6 on our list.
I do believe
Again,
so.
another Azure item. This one is about not having native support for multi-cloud network integration.
Yeah, this is a sticky wicket, and it's funny because even as recently as probably 5 years ago, none of the cloud providers wanted to even acknowledge that the others existed. It was really hysterical to be at one of their user conferences, and it was always mumbled, what the other cloud service providers were. That has changed significantly in the last couple of years with both AWS and Google being very kind of open to the fact that there are other clouds. Azure still seems to be kind of keeping their walled garden, with the exception of their partnership with Oracle. So
Hmm.
you can get an Oracle Fast Connect and an Azure Express Route and transfer traffic between those two environments. But yeah, from a straight up cloud service provider, if you want to move traffic from Azure to another cloud, um, there's not a straightforward means to do that. And there's certainly not a means to do that through Azure. Um, and in fact, this is one of the benefits of some of the cloud, or excuse me, console connect capabilities, in particular our cloud router capability, in that we do allow you to peer together multiple clouds and rapidly transfer traffic. And that was the reason that we built that connectivity model, was for this type of situation where customers were expressing uh, concerns and frustration, not at wanting to move from one cloud to another, but simply needing to share data, payroll data across into their payroll provider, database traffic from uh, development efforts needed to move now into some other portion of the business, maybe over to the sales organization. So we saw a lot of that. Uh, I'm happy to see AWS and Google kind of opening the kimono a bit. The one limitation that all of them do still have is your AWS to Google connectivity is still going to be in the same region, in the same building effectively.
Oh,
Um,
really?
so if you need to move traffic from AWS US East to Google on the West Coast, you're still going to have to probably go find a provider to do that, because they you'll find that the clouds are interconnected just in their little miniature microcosms, not in the broader global tapestry. So
I see. No, that's another good one to watch out for. So, what's the best way to kind of get around this? I hear here in the notes something about some complex VPN tunnels.
yes, yeah, the way to connect anything to anything, at the end of the day, if it's not there, then build a VPN and throw IPsec on top of it. And that is still the case today. So you can, go out over the public internet and connect these assets. Um, it works. We've all been relying on VPNs of some sort for, decades now.
Mhm.
It's not the most straightforward thing to set up, and it puts the burden of maintenance back on the enterprise, back on those system administrators or network
Mhm.
administrators. So it's not real easily consumable. It's kind of the
Yeah.
least common denominator. if all else fails, here's an IPsec tunnel to
Gotcha.
move traffic back and forth. But you are then going to incur public internet egress fees, which you know can be pretty steep and can definitely leave a mark in your checkbook.
Okay. And I'm also seeing that some third-party SD-WAN solutions can address this to a certain extent. Is that right?
Yeah, and this would be similar to the Console Connect Cloud Router solution, where you're going to introduce multiple peers into different locales. Um, you know, SD-WAN's a fascinating technology, much like standards. The great thing about standards is they're enough that you can pick the one that's your favorite. SD-WAN's kind of the same thing now. SD-WAN means 20 different things to 20 different people. But if an enterprise has some sort of SD-WAN solution that they're comfortable with, that works for them, that scales, and that they've got the staff to be able to support and maintain, then that is certainly an option they can look at in this scenario and weigh that against their other options. Um, if not, then there are many connectivity providers popping up that can enable this for the enterprise and help kind of guide them through and maintain them in an ongoing basis, which is wonderful. And I suspect that with time we're going to start seeing these clouds move closer together from a connectivity standpoint. They're going to realize that coming together and offering the customer a bespoke solution that is comprehensive and complete is a far more powerful solution uh, all around. So then you
Absolutely.
get to sort out the billing, which is
That will still remain fun.
oh yeah, they can all argue about who pays which bills. That'll be fun.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's wrap up. I mean, let's see. You can learn more about what we do at Console Connect and PCCW Global at our websites. You can follow us on the social media channels. We're especially active on LinkedIn. And where can people get in touch with you, Jay?
So I'm on LinkedIn, and I'm also available via my Console Connect email address, which is just my first letter of my name. So jturner@consoleconnect.com makes it nice and easy. And on the broader horizon there, Console Connect and PCCW Global are incredibly active in the trade show world. So inevitably, if you're at a show, there's probably either a booth or a handful of our uh, technical associates roaming around, and you can poke us and ask us questions. We love to talk about what we do on a regular basis. So it's great to be able to share the knowledge and help others and hear questions.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for your time today, Jay, and we'll see you next time.
Yeah, cheers. Thanks.
Bye bye.